And for further insight on the major outcomes from the EU-ASEAN summit this week, we're now connected with Pajajaran University International Relations Analyst, Anggia Utami. Hi, Anggi.
Hello, Krizia. Greetings from Universitas Pajajaran. Greetings from Bandung. Thanks for having me today.
Thank you for being with us.
Yes, of course. But Anggia, what we want to know from your perspective as an analyst, what are the major outcomes of this year's EU-ASEAN summit?
Okay, this is a very great questions because actually when we are talking about the outtakes from the summit, we have to highlight the fact that this is the first ever summit leaders between EU and ASEAN. So I think before, of course, we know that the relationship has been existing since informally since 1972, but then after that, so many ministerial meeting levels have been conducted. But then finally, in this 45 years commemoration of relationship between EU and ASEAN, the leaders had met together in Brussels to commemorate the relation. And then through this meetings or through this summit, I think we have to highlight this reaffirmation of commitments, right, between EU and ASEAN to have and to follow the rule-based international order, which the two are really been consistent in doing so, as well to respect the territorial integrity. And of course, this is a very important, Hans mentioned about it a lot, about the importance of economic relationships, like to sustain and then to continue the effective multilateralism approach of economic cooperation, which is now has been moved forward to strategic level since 2020. So I think the major outtakes from this meeting, from this summit, has been on the reaffirmation of the partnership. And as well, of course, there is another thing that we can discuss here that earlier this year, I think a few months ago before the summit, between EU and ASEAN, they have agreed to welcome the EU-ASEAN Comprehensive Air Transport Agreement, which will be a block-to-block air aviation agreement in the world. So I think this is going to be also like another highlight, which is more tangible to the people, in addition to the reaffirmation of relation of partnership between the two.
Right. 45 years is definitely not a short time. Could you give us a glimpse of, how the ties developed in those years between EU and ASEAN?
Okay, like I mentioned before, the EU and ASEAN relationship has been actually started informally since 1972. By that time, actually, ASEAN was the first who created or who first connect to ASEAN, to EC. By the time it was still European community before it changes to EU. They were talking about the entrance of UK to become the part of European community, and then to connect and to try to understand what would be the effect of that entrance of UK to the European community to ASEAN. But then after that, we can see, maybe if I may generalize the relationship into fourth period at least, right? The before 1990s, it was kind of like a very beginning types of relationship, and by the time it was still the time of Cold War. So up until the 1990s, the relationship was still a little bit of low key, which means even though EU see ASEAN as a partner, or maybe like the relationship was about more to international development perspective, which means EU gives a lot as donor to ASEAN as recipient countries, because ASEAN by the time was still a very developing region with low economic growth, right, by the time. But then after that, with the increasing very rapid economic growth in the ASEAN region, particularly we know some countries are counted as the tiger of Southeast Asia,
Yes, true.
including Indonesia. That time, I think it highlight the importance of ASEAN has been started to increase a lot and has been seen as more important for EU by that time. But then, of course, the issues of human rights, let's say in Myanmar, by that time Myanmar was still not the part of ASEAN, become a constraint towards the relationship between EU and ASEAN, or how EU sees ASEAN as a partner. And then after that, we entered the period of 2000s. The 2000s, we know several global changes happened, a very important global event, such as the 9/11, right? And then some of the other events as well, the financial crisis. I think that also have been given a very huge effect of how EU and ASEAN sees their relationship. So by the time, I think maybe in around 2003, if I'm not mistaken, I think EU has started this policy paper called the a new partnership with Southeast Asia. They see that the issues of human rights, let's say the Myanmar cases, should not be holding a hostage between the relationship between the two. And I think that's the first period of time when EU sees ASEAN very has been starting to be a very important partner. And then the years come by, and then we can see how ASEAN developed as the one of the fastest growing region, as President Jokowi mentioned just before in the clips. So I think this also highlighted how EU see ASEAN and its centrality as a very important thing for them. It's also seen by the presentations or like from the speech from the president of European Commission that actually EU is actually seeing ASEAN as a very strategic partner. So I think that's a very important thing that we can see here.
Now, Anggi, as you mentioned earlier about how the relations have been growing and developed throughout the years, and also we see now the summit in Brussels have gone quite conducive, but we are looking at two different group of countries. And each country also, they have their own agenda and also have their own things that they bring into the summit. But what do you think about which countries benefited the most from this EU-ASEAN relationship?
Oh, this is interesting. I mean, if we see EU and ASEAN, both have a very important status in the terms of relationship, partnership, right? But then if you want to see from economics leverage per se, I think, of course, we have to see who is the biggest player in the two regions. Definitely before we see how EU has a free trade agreement with Singapore and Vietnam. So definitely Singapore and Vietnam have been receiving or have been experiencing the huge leverage of benefits from the relation, if we see it from a merely economic perspective. As well, from the EU side, we can see how, of course, Germany, as one of the biggest country who put their exports toward ASEAN, as also the country who benefits the most from this summit, despite of the current war between Ukraine and Russia, as well of the current Myanmar situation. However, if we see it from a more geopolitical perspective, I think it's gonna be like harder to predict, right? It depends on which perspective you are seeing. They still continue this relationship despite of the different agreements or different views on several things, let's say sustainable development or the palm oil issues, but still they keep on going, and even they commemorate their relationship this year.
With Indonesia assuming the ASEAN chairmanship next year, what can we expect from the country with regard to deepening the EU-ASEAN relationship?
I think this is interesting. Maybe you two have seen President Jokowi's statement or speech yesterday at the summit, several days ago, maybe 2 days ago, right? So he mentioned these things about this is a very important moment that we are facing right now. But then he mentioned as well the importance of Indonesia and maybe ASEAN to see themselves as a equal partner, right, towards EU. How there should not be any party who still think that my standard is better than yours. I think this is a very important statement that Indonesia has presented. And I believe like some other ASEAN countries, let's say Malaysia, who also has the same problems or maybe same status in the case of like palm oil issues, also shared the same interests. They want to see ASEAN as a countries, not only as just a market. So the relationship has to be equal, and then the standard should be also adjusted. We know that the sustainability issue has been the main priorities for EU, which we are also thankful for. But then the problem is when we are talking about sustainable development in one country, and when we are talking about some specific topics about, let's say, palm oil arrangement and issues, we still have to think how this sustainable energy or the newly developed energy, renewable energy, is also a very costly thing.
Yeah.
It's a very expensive thing for some countries to do so, especially developing countries. So when President Jokowi stated about the standardization, I think he also maybe refers to these issues, how the way to be sustainable, or how we should go towards a sustainable growth, should be also achieved towards something which is plausible to be achieved or to do so.
All right, Anggia Utami Dewi from Pajajaran University, thank you so much. It's very delightful and also very eye-opening to be able to talk to you, and we hope that we could see you and talk to you in person here in the studio the next time. Thank you so much and take care.
Thank you, Hans.